Welcome to the 6th episode of the ongoing GIIS Healthline webinar series. In this series, we attempt to shed light on the mental well-being of our students. We aim to provide strong support to our parents and be partners with them in the students' journey of achieving emotional well-being. I'm Sabahat Fatima, behavioral counselor at the Smart Campus in Singapore. I handle the responsibility of dealing with the mental and emotional problems of students who may be facing stress and worries of their own, but they may not have a way to voice their concerns. Through an open door policy, we ensure that students can walk in at any time and discuss their problems without fear of breach of confidentiality. We are living in an era of new challenges and a lot of changes. COVID-19 is one of the biggest challenges we are facing right now. But that is only the visible part. The hidden areas are plenty. The concealed anxiety, the emotional adaptation, and the constant worry of the future are just to name a few. They have an abundance of unanswered questions. They could be as small as, what will tomorrow hold? Or, when can I travel to see my friends and family? They may not have the tools of understanding and handling crisis as adults do. However, we must remember that they are inherently resilient. Studies have shown that children can adapt well to circumstances through sheer instinct. However, our job is to help them get prepared beforehand through training and teaching, which is why I'm very glad to be talking today to an expert who will be shedding light on these areas of child development. Allow me to welcome to the webinar Ms. Gayatri Singh. Ms. Singh is a behavioral counselor with Incontact Counselling and Training in Singapore. Ms. Gayatri holds a Master of Counseling from Monash University. She is deeply passionate about mental health and believes in creating a strong and collaborative relationship with her clients, empowering them with the ability to handle life's challenges. She's also a volunteer at a family shelter in Singapore, where she provides counseling for residents with a range of concerns such as trauma, grief, depression, anxiety, relationship, and parenting issues. She's a member of the Singapore Association of Counselling. Welcome to the webinar, Ms. Singh.
Thank you very much.
I'm also joined by my esteemed colleague and student counselor from GIIS Noida campus, Ms. Suchita Sehgal. Ms. Sujita is the school counselor of Noida campus in India. She has done her master's in psychology and has had over 3 years of experience in catering to the needs of children. She believes that empathy and optimism are the new superpowers necessary for today's world. She has worked with Manipal hospitals with their clinical psychology department and is connected with various NGOs to provide wellness programs to the underprivileged children. Welcome to the webinar, Ms. Suchita.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Before we begin, let me just list a few house rules for the webinar. Parents who have specific questions with relation to the webinar content can post their questions to the Q&A section in the Zoom app. Our online panelists will answer as many questions live as possible. At the end of the session, we take questions from this section and direct them to the team, who will reply to the questions on air. We also humbly request parents to listen to the entire webinar before posting their questions, as most of their concerns would have already been addressed in the webinar. We will be happy to answer any other questions arising at the end. So, without further ado, I hand over the session proceedings to Ms. Singh, who will make a small presentation on our subject, after which we will indulge in a conversation with her. Over to you, Ms. Singh.
Thank you so much, Sabahat, and thank you for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll just start with sharing my screen, and I just want to say hello to everybody, and thank you for being here. Thank you for taking time out to attend this. So today we're talking about resilience in times of crisis. But before we start off, I'll start off by introducing Incontact Counselling and Training. We're a team of 5 therapists and we work with the local as well as the expat community here in Singapore. We work with clients of all ages, including children, teens, individuals, couples, and families. Each one of us at Incontact uses a very, very person-centered and tailored approach and a combination of therapies to suit our clients. Now, Sabahat has very kindly introduced me, so I will not bore you again with the professional details, but I'll just add that in my personal life, I am a mom myself to a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old. So my house is a very interesting place of mood swings, hormones, and unpredictable weather. I would like us to take a few minutes to reflect on what a crisis is. And I have a question for you. What is your idea? What is your experience, if you're comfortable sharing, of a crisis? If you could just pop your answers in the chat, I'll give everyone some time and we can discuss it from there. We have an answer here. Crisis for me is not having control. That's right. When something happens and we feel this is something that we can't control, that's a crisis. So crisis is about not having control. Crisis is about a significant event that makes us feel, traumatized. And so everyone experiences a crisis at some point or another. Crisis comes in many forms. And when we experience stressful life events, a lot of us go through trauma. And trauma can have a significant impact on the brain. This in turn affects our mental health, resulting in certain behaviors and impacting our functioning. Which takes us to the next question. What is resilience? Psychologists define resilience as a process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant stress. Humans have the innate capacity to survive, and the ability to cope and bounce back develops over time. It is a process. Resilience is not a skill that is outside anyone's reach. It can be learned. In fact, in our work, we find that those people who had the skill from before and those who developed it later on actually displayed the same level of resilience. Which brings us to the next very important point. What is resilience not? Many of us think that that resilience is the ability to pick oneself up and return to the same situation. There is a pressure to pick ourselves up and go back. But resilience is also about learning not to return to the same situation. It is about knowing that one has that option and feeling empowered to exercise that choice. So opting out of a situation is also resilience. Secondly, resilience is not an end goal. It is a process. As we said, it develops over time. Now, children respond to trauma based on what age that they're at. In infancy, children need contact, care, nurturing. They have limited verbal capacity, and they can show physical distress if their needs are unmet. They may seem numb. They may not show their feelings. Trauma can leave them with selective mutism, and they can stop speaking. Preschoolers present trauma through confused thoughts. They may exhibit regression to pre-verbal behavior, bedwetting, thumb sucking, sleepwalking. They may play repetitive games that reflect their fears. They may dissociate from what's going on around them, appear to be daydreaming or oblivious to their surroundings. Focus for preschoolers is on their immediate life. School-age children aged 6 to 10 would experience nightmares. They may show anger towards parents, mistrust of others, fear of own death. They may feel unstable and disruptive. They may display behaviors which are opposite to their pre-trauma personalities. Early adolescence, as we all know, is a period of extreme awkwardness and difficulty. Physiological changes are accompanied with emotional upheaval, and trauma on this age group can have long-lasting effects. Nausea, headaches, sleep disturbances, mood swings, low self-esteem, all this is part of adolescent trauma. They may also experience survivor guilt in case there's been a death. This age group is hugely influenced by media, stories, movies, poetry, and so they may also feel the need to express themselves through these. Adolescents, slightly older adolescents, they experience increased emotional upheaval. This age group is seeking independence as well as guidance, so it can be quite tricky to navigate that. They may become secretive in their need for independence. Risk-taking behaviors or attention-seeking behaviors are their coping mechanisms to escape the pain and suffering. Which brings us to the point, what are the factors that actually influence resilience? Now, we have found that there are 3 key factors that influence resilience. Health and well-being, basics, healthy Food and lifestyle habits, good nutrition, getting enough sleep, exercising, having consistent routines, all these boost the capacity of children to be resilient. Home and school need to be supportive and nurturing environments where positive connections are made. The most crucial factor, however, is the relationship between the child and their primary caregiver. The presence and support of a parent or a caregiver really helps the process and increases the chances of a child developing resilience. This not only includes nurturing and caring for the child, but also giving them safe and secure boundaries. Children have 5 core needs that have to be met in order for them to become resilient. The first one is attachment. Children have a basic need for a close and nurturing relationship with their caregivers. This close relationship provides them with acceptance, safety, and stability. They also need to be able to express their needs and emotions. This means giving them a safe space to be able to express themselves and validating their feelings. As they grow and interact with the world around them, children begin to develop their sense of identity, their likes, their dislikes, their values. They also begin to develop a sense of agency and competence. This is crucial for them to gain an understanding of who they are so that they can navigate life's challenges. Boundaries and limits help children to feel safe and secure. Rules and routines create predictability, but it's not only just about that. Rules and restrictions also teach them how to adapt as they face disappointments. And learning how to cope with disappointments is a huge part of becoming resilient. For a child to develop the necessary resilience, it is important for them to transition smoothly through all of these developmental needs. So how do we build that resilience in children? We need to allow children to be able to express themselves, reassure them, to provide them with a sense of safety. Listen, validate, empathize, and don't jump in with unsolicited advice. Reassure them to provide them a sense of safety and security. Give them a sense of routine. Connect with them. In fact, with younger children, that connection could look like sitting on the floor and playing with them, playing with toys, coloring, art and craft. Older ones may feel the need to spend time with you. Encourage them to talk, encourage creative expression, encourage journaling in older children. Adolescents can be involved in helping and supporting their peers or rebuilding the community. Not only does this help them to gain a sense of confidence, but it also provides an outlet for them to process their trauma and express their emotions. On the subject of reaching out for help, I have actually, so the last and the most important point here is that don't suffer alone. If you feel that it's becoming difficult to manage or that you need help, look for that help, reach out, ask. That help can be professional help, or it can be somebody from your family or from the community. There is no shame in asking for help. And on that subject, I have actually put together a list of helplines for you. So here, there are quite a few helpline numbers in Singapore, and children can call these helplines. They're completely confidential. They provide a safe and non-judgmental space for them to talk about whatever's bothering them. So I'm sure Ms. Sabahat will be happy to share these with you if you reach out, or you can take a screenshot now. And that's it from me. I'll hand this, thank you for listening, and I'll hand it back to Sabahat.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gayatri. You know, you've rightly presented resilience as a very complex concept, but it's a very useful skill to have at the same time. It has many facets to it, but it's something that we can truly cultivate in all our children. That brings me to our discussion point, the first discussion point of today. Ms. Suchita, I would like to ask you, how do you think resilience has helped us in a time like this, especially with the COVID-19 happening and, you know, so many changes and challenges? How do you think resilience plays a role here?
I feel like resilience plays a really, really important role, because resilience in actuality is the ability to bounce back from a worsened situation. And what a worsened situation more than a pandemic. We were literally pushed to coop up in our houses. Anytime, even if we go out to the market, at least when I go out to the market and I see somebody not following social distancing, that also gives me a little bit of anxiety that why is that person not wearing a mask? or why is it there's no proper distancing? So it is very important right now to have that sense of bouncing back from the negative scenarios that have happened, just like the vaccine, like in our human immunity system as well, how it happens that we are exposed to a particular lighter variation of the virus and then we are pulling us back to a stronger immunity. That's how we should inculcate this feeling in our children, that it is the worst scenario, but it does make us really stronger. Lance Armstrong, who is a very famous cyclist, he also said that if he wouldn't have suffered from cancer, he wouldn't have, thought of recalculating his career, rethinking his choices, and getting the zest to actually do something that others told him that he can't. So I do really feel that during these times, it's very important for us to teach our children that how they can take an opportunity from this particular scenario, build up on their confidence, build up on their relations personally, as Gayatri ma'am has very rightly said, how parents and children's close relationship and family situations does really improve their outcome and outlook on situations as such. So I think it's really important at this time.
Yeah, I completely do agree that, it's the changes that help us learn and adapt. And it's only through these crises that we learn and we get those coping skills. Ms. Gayatri, would you like to add anything?
I think Suchita ma'am has pretty much covered, that was very well put. Thank you.
Right. So Ms. Gayatri, I would now like to ask you, you briefly touched on how we can help children and what are the various symptoms children show in their way of showing crisis or in the symptoms that they show. How do you think we can begin inculcating resilience in children from a very young age?
Right. So that's a prime opportunity, right? That's not that there is an ideal opportunity, but from a young age, we can start to build resilience in children by pressing what we call the pause button. So by that, I mean not jumping in to help them every single time. Allow them to make mistakes, allow them to fall, let them figure it out, let them dress themselves, let them put on their shoes. Just small things like these. And I know that as a parent, it can be very hard when you're rushing with something, when you need to get them somewhere. But it's these little steps that actually help to build resilience in young children, because as they fall, as they falter, as they learn from their mistakes, and those mistakes can be turned around into teachable moments. What did you learn from this? How can we do this differently? That is how we can start to build resilience from a very, very young age. And then they also learn social navigation, they learn negotiation. And when I highlighted that point about limits and boundaries, children will constantly push against boundaries. That is also a part of building resilience, because they learn how to negotiate, they learn how to be disappointed. We as a world, we live in a world where we don't want to disappoint our children. We want to provide for them. But that can be, which is all very well. The intentions are correct, but we are somewhere putting them at a disadvantage by over providing. So we need to watch that in ourselves. We need to give them that sense, because that's how they will develop the self-confidence, because we can't always be around.
Definitely. I think that's a really good point Ms. Gayatri mentioned, that it's very important for us to allow our children to make mistakes, put on their shirt, wear their shoes, maybe mess up the buttons a little bit. And then, we use that as a teaching opportunity. So that brings me to the next connecting question. Ms. Suchita, do you think there's any connection, or if there is a connection, what is that connection between environmental and home factors, that a child faces, and how does it influence their level of resilience?
I think, my thoughts are very much connected to Gayatri ma'am's thoughts as well. It does play a huge role, because the initial years of a child's childhood does really influence their early childhood learning experiences. And the way they start to fill those experiences and how they take up the information goes a very, very long way. And that is how they will react in future when they are teenagers, or when they are just approaching minor failures of life. That's when they will actually start using those defense mechanisms that they have learned in their early years of childhood. So I really feel that parents have in the initial years, they have the role of a provider, where they have to be there for the children to give the food, the basic amenities, cleanliness, all those things in the first few years. The parent is the one who's the provider. As the child gets older, the parent should also kind of change their role from the provider to the facilitator, where they're just like kind of enabling the child to uplift themselves, enabling the child by trying, just like we were talking about right now, trying to tie their own laces, trying to button something up. When there is a situation at home, keeping the child in the decision making process, asking the child if the decision that they have, parents have made, is it affecting them in some ways or not, or just giving the child the respect that we would give to a proper adult. I think this goes in a very, very long way, because as and when a kid is an adult and they have to take their own decisions, they do not feel clueless at that time. They would feel that, oh, I have been given this opportunity and this is how I can take it forward. And they've seen their parents giving the respect to others. So they also ultimately learns that how they also have to give the respect. So resilience is more of a product which is given and is give and take relationship. So they kind of will be resilient as well as making other people more confident in resilience by them just showing the resilience. So I think it is very important that from the very early ages, parents and caregivers who are very like near and dear to the child, they should start showing signs of resilience, confidence, and empathy towards each other.
I completely agree. I think that's one thing that we can vouch for, that empathy plays a big role in resilience, in incorporating resilience. And by us showcasing empathy and, modeling it with our children, with our students, I think that also teaches them to be more empathetic and stuff. I would also now take this moment to request parents and students, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the Q&A, and we will reach to it at the end of our discussion. Another question that is frequently discussed when we're discussing about resilience is, what are the factors that affect resilience? What do we have to look at when we're looking at resilience? I personally do believe that when we're talking about resilience and we're talking about human development, it's very important for us to look at coping and control. To understand what are the skills we need to cope. So if a child falls down, how do we react? If a child, doesn't do so well in the exam, how do we teach the child to cope? Do we teach them unhealthy mannerisms wherein they feel like, oh, I'm a failure, I can't ever write another exam? Or do we help them in, contributing, in learning that this is a stepping stone? And by that, I think there's an acceptance that the children need to have, that they may not have control over everything in their life, but with giving up that control, they have coping skills, right? What do you feel about this, Ms. Suchita?
I do really feel it's very, very important. Like, even if sometimes some parents come to me and they ask me that, oh, my child was very sincere since the very beginning. Now they've just entered the teenage years and the rebellious nature has started. So I do really tell them that it's just about like forming that balance between power and responsibility. So the moment you kind of get the power and responsibility balance, which is definitely a very hit and trial method. It would take time to reach that balance, but it is very, very important to just enable the child to believe that this is something which is your responsibility. If you want your child to have the manners that whenever you're entering a room, you should knock, then just doing that with your child, giving them the power that, okay, whenever I am entering your room, I will also knock and then I'll enter, so that they kind of learn from our own behavior. So I really second your thought.
Yeah, definitely. We have been talking about having coping skills, about having control, and giving them the power. All these are points that they do have to develop. But at the point of crisis, when they're hearing the bad news, when they're discovering that there's something wrong happening, it's not as a normal flow. Ms. Gayatri, how do you suggest we help children to deal with that immediate, I can say, bad news?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing with bad news is, right, that the first thing I would say is, if there are questions, if there's an immediate reaction, first of all, validate whatever they're feeling, right? So don't try to sugarcoat it. Don't try to turn it into a positive moment. allow them to feel whatever it is that they're feeling, because bad news is distressing. But on that point, and remind them that, and this is something that, that both of you talked about, was also modeling how you react to bad news, right? And it's okay to feel upset. It's okay to feel shocked, right? So meet them in their emotion wherever they are. So what I will say about bad news is that, and this is probably for slightly older children, we all, and this is not just children, we also do it, is doom scrolling, what we call doom scrolling. So, there's bad news after bad news after bad news. And the pandemic has been a prime example of that, right? There were people that in this constant cycle. And I think at that point, it is important to shift that lens a little bit and highlight what's going well. Where is the good news in the world? There have been, people are still demonstrating empathy. People are still demonstrating kindness. Even during the pandemic, the community came together in many, many ways to support each other. So just shifting that perspective for them, shifting that lens for a little bit, a little bit for them, can help them to even seek out good news. And that's a part of developing that resilience, that, okay, there is bad news, but it goes hand in hand together. There are some terrible things happening in the world, but there are good things happening as well. But it starts with acknowledging and validating how they're feeling, and then sort of slightly shifting that lens along.
Right. I think that's a wonderful way to put it. While we do accept the bad news, we also show that there's also good in the world. There's also some good things happening. And, not keeping the focus only on the good things and not keeping the focus only on the bad things really helps children to, learn those skills of resilience and have time to practice it as well. When we talk about resilience, I've always heard the word assertiveness come into it. Like, we need to be assertive. And a lot of psychologists say that it's a crucial factor for making a child resilient. Ms. Suchita, how do you think this can help children in being resilient?
I feel like that resilience, assertiveness, empathy, they're all a kind of lifestyle that we should adapt nowadays, because assertiveness just basically means that accepting ourselves and respecting ourselves for who we are. Just accepting our own choices, that whatever my choices are, I am going to stick to my choices, and very honestly and in a more appropriate way, just respecting the other person's options and then giving out my opinion as well. So the moment a child has that standing up ability in themselves, they will feel that whenever they're being challenged too much, which is getting to their physiological or physical or mental health or mental status, if they have assertiveness within them, they won't actually feel like, okay, this is the area where I can draw myself. This is the line where I draw. Now I need to show that this is my level of respect that I have for myself. So I am going to bounce back, and I am going to show that this is the level that I can come up to. So I really do feel like teaching assertiveness, resilience, and empathy goes in a very hand in hand. It's like a recipe. You have to mix all those things to make out a perfect, mature human being, which is very, helpful to the community at large. So assertiveness really, like, just giving the opportunity to having them respect themselves as well as others, it would go a very long way, I feel.
I truly agree that resilience is not just a one skill that you learn. I think it's a mesh of multiple skills.
Yeah.
You talk so much about why resilience is there, and what are the other skills that go hand in hand. Ms. Gayatri, I would like to ask you, why do you think there is a need to know about resilience? Why do you think these children need to know to cultivate resilience?
The simple answer is for the sake of our mental health, for the sake of their mental health, right? So what does resilience do for us? It's good to reflect on that, because developing resilience gives us the coping skills to deal with life's adversities. Life is full of ups and downs. Nobody promised it was going to be a cakewalk, and yet we grow up and dreaming, not just children, adults as well, growing up, dreaming and hoping for a good future, hoping for an easy ride. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it also comes with the acceptance that actually none of this is guaranteed, right? But dealing with the shock of that, the surprise of that, when things do go upside down, resilience gives us healthy coping mechanisms. Otherwise, we fall into mental health issues And it also leads to addiction issues and other unhealthy coping mechanisms and personality disorders. So it is very, very important to try and cultivate resilience at all levels. The importance can't be stressed enough.
I completely agree. That's the main reason why we decided to have this webinar today, to help students cultivate resilience. But, I always tell my students, and when they come to me with any problem, or they say, how can I be more happier? How can I be more resilient? I always try to explain to them that too much of anything, even if it's a good skill, may be harmful in the long run, right? I feel like, while resilience is a useful trait, we shouldn't always teach, I know Ms. Gayatri touched on this, we shouldn't always focus on, bounce back quickly, or, you have to bear this situation, or you look at all these adversities and stuff like that. We aren't trying to make the students unnecessarily tolerant also. We don't want them to be tolerant of all unpleasant situations. When we talk about resilience, we're trying to have that perfect balance of dealing with the situation as well as moving on, right? What do you feel about this, Ms. Gayatri?
I think you are right. Too much resilience. I mean, it depends on what too much resilience looks like, right? It's never, there is no negative connotation to it. But yes, there is a fine line between being resilient and between being immune. It's a fine line, right? So if it reaches a point where it affects, your empathy, it affects your emotional availability, it affects your vulnerability, it affects your ability to respond and meet the other person, that's when it starts to become a problem. So that I still may probably rephrase that as perhaps not too much resilience, but resilience that leads to a certain immunity or desensitization. You see, and we see desensitization for people who've been in extreme situations. I mean, I'll give you a personal example. I lived through a political crisis, and I feel I'm a little bit less affected by the news, and that's desensitization. I don't think that's lack of empathy, and that certainly doesn't come from over resilience. But yes, it's also important for children and for all of us to identify what is resilience actually, and what is immunity and what is not being. I think it's important to make that distinction, because for all traits to be under the umbrella or the name of resilience, that's where it can start to get tricky.
I completely agree. Ms. Suchita, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think even I completely agree to that, because it kind of takes us a full circle from where we started, that when in childhood we have to give our child chances to fail, chances to make some small mistakes, because that's what makes them normal, that's what makes them okay. And even when my students come up to me and they ask me some questions that, ma'am, we had a fight with our friend and we don't know what to do, we really don't like fights. So that's what I tell them, that it's normal to have a fight, it's good to have a fight within friends. You can't just have a relationship where you are not fighting at all, or you're not expressing yourself at all. There's this movie Finding Nemo. I don't know how many of us would have seen it, but I love the dialogue that's there, that just keep swimming. I'm a hardcore believer of that, because that literally sums up the whole essence of resilience for me, that there are going to be worse scenarios, but until unless you go out and look out for them, you wouldn't be able to just keep swimming and get through it. So I do really feel that it's a whole circle, that we have to have a complete Venn diagram of all our shortcomings, strengths, and weaknesses just to overcome and be our high functioning selves.
Very well put, Ms. Suchita. Love the example of Finding Nemo. I think it's very relatable. Moving on, I think we have a few questions from the parent community as well. One parent has asked a very pertinent question. The parent who hasn't shared her name would like to know how children will handle uncertainties when schools reopen. I do understand that in some places the schools have not reopened yet, and they want to know how the child will cope with the overdose of, so many emotions, so much stimulation after leading such a protected life, for almost 2 years in this pandemic. Ms. Gayatri, what do you have to say about that?
I think that's a really good question, and it is a huge challenge. It's a question that's foremost in most parents' minds. How is my child going to cope? And for that, I will bring up what Ms. Suchita said about keep swimming. I would say that in a human context, one foot in front of the other, right? So there, it is very important for you to, that keep that connection with your child and allow them a space to feel nervous, allow them, because when you validate, when you empathize, when you identify, and they know that you understand as a parent how they're feeling, that's quite a bit of the battle won, right? And then also giving them, reminding them of what their strengths are. And there is something called, there's some research that an author has done. She's written a book called The Resilience Donut. And essentially the author talks about, reminding children of three things. What do I have? What am I? And what can I do? Right? So strengths building and helping them to identify what is it that they have, what are the skills that they have, what is going well in their lives that will allow them to cope with that whole onslaught of that, what's going to happen at school and how they will cope. So I think strengths building and helping them to identify, validating, empathizing, all this is very, very important to prepare them.
Right, that's a very useful resource as well. Ms. Suchita, I would like to know, I know we were discussing earlier that for you, schools have reopened recently. What are the observations you feel that the children may have difficulties adjusting to, and how do you think they can cope with that?
I think the major way, like whenever we go into the class as well, the first thing when the teacher changes is that they have to sanitize their hands again. The way that they used to sit, it is really different because they're sitting in a zigzag way. Like literally from the way that they're sitting to the way that they're breathing with the masks on, everything has changed for the children. So we at GIIS Noida, what we have done that we have not changed the routine that they were following, like the timetable that they were following, we haven't changed that. So in between our classes, we do have a 10-minute break so that children can actually just have the same environment that they were having at home, that they're logging out from one class and joining into the other one, or there is a gap in between two teachers, so they can just grade themselves, put themselves into perspective that which class is going to be coming next. We also have tried to do a few things in which we do a lot of activities in between, either in break time or even in some classes. We have integrated the hybrid mode. So in the morning and at the end of the classes, they do get to talk to their online friends and the online friends get to talk to them. So it's really fun because they're like, oh ma'am, can I come and show this drawing to my online friend? And I haven't showed him this much. Or ma'am, can I just for once put this in the chat box? Because that is one thing that they really used to like in online classes, chatting in the chat box. So some things, these small things, they do really pick up on, and we do give them the opportunity to enjoy that, especially with the primary section, because it's a huge change for them. Most of the children from grade 1 and grade 2, this is the first experience of school life, which is with the mask on, sitting distantly, not sharing our lunch with our friends. So we try to give them as much comfort as we can for whatever limitations we have. So it's challenging, but it's quite it's fun because everybody is there now. We have some students coming in. We can physically look at them, give them a star or a sticker, and just make them cheer up this way. So yeah, that's definitely there.
Definitely. I think it's the new normal, as I've heard so many people putting it. It's a new normal. And I think we as people that work with mental health, I think it's a very big responsibility on our end to make sure that these children adapt to the new normal. They understand that this is the place that, while some things are the same, some things may not remain the same, and how do we adjust to that? So I think that was very well put. Another parent wants to know if there are any wrong resilience building mechanism. It's an interesting question, since it's possible that, like we've said, we've focused on resilience, but what happens if they learn to be so-called resilient, maybe in a negative way, where, like Ms. Gayatri touched on, they become immune and they use defense mechanisms such as denial and stuff, and they feel like they've moved on, but in actual essence they may not have fully moved on. So how do we cope with that, Ms. Suchita?
So it actually is quite I have seen it happening a lot, especially in these preteen ages, when they feel like, no, nothing, I have seen a lot. And especially in the preteen ages, not even in the teenagers, because that time they do get a sense of self. They kind of get a reflection and feedback from their friends, from their families, from their personal experiences. So that time they still have the realization. But in those preteen years, there is no as such realization or feedback. So as parents, it is our responsibility to, or as caregivers or as teachers, it is our responsibility to give them the realization that it is not wrong to be sensitive. Because a lot of times I've heard that the opposite word for being strong is sensitive. So sensitive is taken as a weakness a lot of the times. So just telling them from the very early ages and even in these ages that being sensitive is not a weakness. It is not something that is wrong. It can be definitely used as a opportunity, as a power. So showing them that it's normal for us to be weak sometimes, because parents a lot of the times they try to keep the strong face on for the children, like will not fight in front of the children, will not have serious discussions. If there is a financial crisis, not discussing that with the children. So keeping a very strong face on, and then suddenly the child is seeing adverse situations, this also kind of plays a role into that kind of behavior of forming defense mechanisms, that okay, my mother and my dad, my father have been very strong for me always, so even I have to be very strong for them. So these small changes, all these psychological and mental health issues, I think they can be attuned a little bit with these small life skills changes and lifestyle changes in the interaction that we have amongst each other. So for me, I think these small changes should be made to make the child understand that it's okay to feel whatever emotion you're feeling right now.
Of course, definitely. Miss Gayatri, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think it's it brings me back. I mean, all those are absolutely great points. And I'll just add something, that resilience, what we said about not forcing them to go back to a situation. Okay, so and that also ties in with assertiveness, right? That it's okay to have your boundaries, and it's okay. So resilience, I think, where sometimes there can be a mistake is to sort of throw them back into the same situation, and they don't always need that. So that is a big part of recognizing that is not the way to teach resilience, I think. Yeah.
Definitely. And the last question for our webinar today, I've heard lots of parents bring this up, and this question has been asked again. Do you think is addiction to gadgets is also like a type of trauma? I do understand that lots of parents are struggling with, having the balance between giving them access to gadgets and technology, and how do they limit that? So because their students are so glued to their games and they refuse to concentrate on studies or self-development. How do you think parents can deal with such behavior? Ms. Gayatri?
I think, very, very pertinent question. It's something that everyone is struggling with. And of course, pandemic times with parents working from home, it's the easiest babysitter. And when smart gadgets came in, I was always, amazed at how easy it was to, stick a child in a chair and eat your meal peacefully at a restaurant. So it has its uses, but definitely I think that addiction is a big issue, and it really does not bode well for the brain. And I think that is where is a true test of setting boundaries. And remember, we set boundaries as parents to keep our children safe, and that means if we have to take steps like having set screen times, having a Wi-Fi cutoff time. These are basic gadget hygienes. Everybody's one of the things that we always say, you might always tell parents, is also gadgets should be charging in a common area. Gadgets should actually be in my house. We put gadgets, all devices in a basket before bedtime outside the room. So yes, there is noise. Yes, there is all of that. So, but I think boundary setting here is very, very important for parents. And I recognize that it is a challenge, but then that is where we have to negotiate with them, motivate them, whatever it takes. Ultimately, it's for their safety. And, like we said, if they're disappointed and they're going to scream and shout about it, then, hey, it's part of the resilience building.
Yeah, very nicely put. I think it's us that the responsibility lies on to model such behaviors. If we ask our children, oh, don't use your gadgets, but we're here like, oh, I have an important call to make. If I have an important discussion to have, I need to do it at the dining table. Then it kind of defeats the purpose in a way. So I think it's a learning experience for both the children and us as well to have that balance of gadgets.
Yeah, and I would just like to add that please remember, a device that you give to your child is their privilege. It is not their right.
Definitely.
That is something we all forget.
Yes, that's very true. Very, very valid point.
Yeah, I think we all resonate with that fact. I would just like to ask if there's any other closing thoughts or any thoughts. Ms. Gayatri, do you have any final words to share?
No, I think, I would just like to say that, it's a, thank you for organizing this. It's a very relevant topic. And I think it's really one step at a time. So the only thing that I would say towards the end is that resilience, there's no end goal. There is no measure of resilience. It's really, really one step at a time. And the current times are teaching us that. I would also like to end with saying that when your child asks you something, when there is something, please don't lie. That can also be counterproductive to developing their resilience. We don't have to go into details, which is where factual, age-appropriate information comes in. So if there is an incident, if there is a crisis of some sort, if there is really, really tragic news, we give them factual, age-appropriate information. But at no point does it help the child for us to lie or sugarcoat it. That's it.
Definitely. Oh, I think Gayatri ma'am has put it very well as a conclusion and closing thoughts, because it's very important to tell our child the realities and the truths of life, because once we tell them the truths of life, they actually take their own time to react to a particular situation, which is very good for their future as well, because when in future, if they get a bad news, their first reaction wouldn't be running to their parents and asking, oh, what do I do now? They would know that, okay, this situation demands this particular kind of reaction, and they would be independent enough, because initially we do want our child to be dependent on us, and our children are dependent on us. But after a period of time, independence and having that sense of self within a person goes a very long way of them being a very conscientious human being. So I think that's all we have to teach. And a little bit learning by example, just being aware of our surroundings would help our child to be aware of their own surroundings. So that would go a very long way for me.
Thank you so much. That is all the time we have for today. We will also be uploading a video recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel and send everyone a link. So you can revisit this discussion again whenever you want. I would like to thank everyone for their participation. We are very thrilled to see our initiative getting such encouraging interaction from the parent community. I truly believe that together we can help our children deal with these issues effectively and make them mentally and emotionally strong human beings as they prepare to take on the world in the future. I would also like to take this moment to thank our panelists for sharing some very valuable information and tips for our listeners. We would also be keeping you informed of the next webinar in the series of the GIIS Healthline. We invite you to share topics of interest to you. Kindly note that every response given during the panel discussion cannot be generalized for all students. It surely is not a one-size-fits-all solution. Rather, all students are addressed on a one-on-one basis, and every child is going to be treated as a unique individual. Lastly, I would like to thank the management and organizers of the webinar for their support. Together, let's strive to keep this initiative going in full force. With this, we come to the end of the webinar. Stay safe, everyone, and have a very good day ahead.